Tonight, he faces one of the most challenging briefs in the executive, from a water network that's bursting at the seams via traffic gridlock to a dysfunctional MOT system. John O'Dowd joins me live in his studio to explain how he's tackling each of those issues. Plus, there are just 7 days of campaigning left in the Republic's general election. We'll hear from the three main parties vying to lead the next government in Dublin. Hello, he's been in the driving seat at the Infrastructure Department since the start of February, and his ministerial in tray is bursting. There's no shortage of questions for John O'Dowd tonight, so let's get straight down to business. Minister, welcome to the programme. Thank you for joining us this evening. Our wastewater infrastructure is clearly a major problem, particularly for house building. The Construction Employers Federation claims problems with the system are holding back 8,500 homes, which equates to about £1 billion of investment. And when you then add in housing associations and other developers, that figure rises to around 19,000 homes that are unable to go ahead. Those are huge numbers. What are you planning to tackle that institution?
Well, first of all, I don't recognise those numbers. Even if NI Water was fully funded during its current budgetary period, which brings it up to 2027, they would be able to connect 4,500 homes through their interventions. There's another 18,000 properties that could be connected through what's known as developer contributions, where if developers are prepared to pay for the separation of stormwater from foul water, those buildings would go ahead. But yes, NI Water faces challenges, as do all our public services, after almost 14 years of Tory austerity.
Can I just say that those figures are from the Construction Employers Federation speaking to the Infrastructure Committee at Stormont last month?
I accept the figures have been published, I accept the figures have been quoted, I accept the figures have been given elsewhere. But when I look at the actual rollout of NI Water's investment portfolio for the next number of years, if I was able to fund them fully, 4,500 homes would have been connected through my intervention and funding of NI Water. There's 18,000 properties that can be connected through developer connections or contributions, because if they are able to fund the separation of stormwater from the foul water system, those could go ahead. But I do accept we face significant challenges in NI Water, as we do with all public services. So what am I doing about it? I have a three-pronged strategy in relation to it. I'm working with my executive colleagues to secure a long-term funding package for NI Water, and we've seen some success with that in this last week, where I've secured another over £30 million for NI Water in this last week. That's an additional to the nearly £500 million worth of funding they had at the start of the financial year. My executive colleagues have agreed to a policy proposal that I brought forward in relation to sustainable drainage, which will allow us to work with nature in terms of dealing with significant falls of rainwater, separating those using nature and swales and ponds, etc. And I am also working on legislation which would, for the first time, allow developers to contribute to actual wastewater infrastructure at wastewater plants as well. So there's a three-pronged strategy ongoing, and we have seen some recent success in it, and I'm confident that we can continue to map our way through this.
So are you saying that the scale of the problem is not as has been articulated by the Construction Employers Federation and indeed the Royal Society of Ulster Architects, speaking at the same Infrastructure Committee hearing, which said, a representative of the RSUA said, the Northern Ireland wastewater infrastructure situation is a fiasco. Apparently one architectural practice alone has £400 million worth of projects held up in the system. I mean, they're not making these numbers up. They're not plucking them out of the air.
Well, I recognise the numbers have been published. I've heard them before. But again, I go back to the data that's in front of me as infrastructure.
But you recognise that the numbers have been published, but you don't accept that they're correct. Is that what you're telling me?
Well, it all depends how you add them up, or what formula, or and I don't know how long over that period of time, that £400 million, for instance, is that over the period of the current price control period for NI Water? I simply don't know. So you could have projects in building and development over the next 10 years that could add up to £400 million. I know what the projects are in front of me. 4,500 homes could have been connected during this price period, and there is potential for 18,000 to be connected if developer contributions are included.
Well, let's look at some other numbers and see what you make of them, because They seem to be born in facts as well. The numbers I've talked about there represent potential projects that can't go ahead. The situation is worse than that because we've already completed housing projects that can't be released because NI Water can't or won't connect them into the system. So we've been doing some research on this in preparation for tonight's conversation. In Dungannon, Radius Housing has 29 houses that have been ready for handover since March 2024. Northern Ireland Water hasn't progressed connections. Radius is out £150,000 in lost rent while it's still paying back the loan for building the houses. That's houses that are ready for families that desperately need them, some of them with very particular needs that can't be used, can't be moved into because Northern Ireland Water can't connect them to the system.
Well, I don't know the case specific, but I do know how the planning system works. And when a planning application is put in, NI Water is one of the consultees, one of the official consultees in a planning application. So before a planning application would be granted and before a builder would go to build, they would know before they laid their first brick as to whether NI Water could connect them to the system or there was conditions under which NI Water expected them to fulfil at the completion of that construction programme. So no builder would go on site not knowing what
Not
NI
sure
Water
that's absolutely right. Not sure that's absolutely right
Mark,
because some of these. Well, I'm going to give you more examples.
I've worked around the planning system for over 20 years.
I'm sure you have. But listen, with the greatest respect, you may know the system, but with the greatest respect to you, representatives of the Construction Employers Federation and the Royal Society of Ulster Architects are also themselves experts, and they know their way around the system. And I doubt very much that they are making these numbers up.
I'm not suggesting they're making the numbers up, Mark. What I'm saying to you is,
you're suggesting you don't believe them. Let's talk about some more of the stalled projects.
No, please, don't put those words in my mouth. I have not said for 1 second I do not believe them. I have not said that.
You said you don't recognise the
numbers. I
numbers.
don't recognise the numbers.
Yeah, well, I'm telling you what they say.
For me, different from me saying I don't believe them.
Well, do you believe them? Do you believe them?
What needs to be interrogated is this, and you're a journalist, so let's interrogate the figures. Yeah. Over what period of time is that investment programme planned out for? Well, NI Water is funded will be funded over a programme up to 2027. If they're saying that there's £400 million worth of properties that aren't being built between now and 2027, then that's fair enough. But I think you as a journalist and other journalists should interrogate those figures.
Let's talk about some other stalled projects that are in areas of desperate housing need. In West Belfast, we know about 28 houses under construction where connecting to the wastewater system is a problem. In South Belfast, we know of 94 homes being held up. In North Belfast, the figure is 100. And in that case, Northern Ireland Water is saying it won't talk about it until 2033.
Again, specific issues.
These are all social houses, by the way.
Specific issues I'm not aware of, but I do know the planning system. And if a planner or a developer has put in a planning application, they will be fully aware of NI Water's intentions before they lay the first brick on the site. So none of that will come as a surprise. Now, I don't know these specific issues, but I do know the planning system. And NI Water would have set out quite clearly to each of those developers what their intentions were before the first break was.
But sometimes I think that the goalposts move. In Derry, another housing association called Apex has 421 social homes under construction, the first phase of a total 1,500. Northern Ireland Water says there's no time frame connections to happen, even though construction has in fact started. The company also says the cost of infrastructure for the connections has increased from £8 million to £15 million. So there's an example of NI Water saying, well, it's going to cost £8 million. Now it's going to cost 15
Again, I haven't got the specifics of those.
Well, that's very convenient, isn't it? I mean, we've researched it and those are the numbers that are there.
If you had supplied me with those questions beforehand, I may have come to you with a more informed position. But the reality is...
Are you saying there's not a problem? You saying there's not an issue?
At the very start of this interview, I said they face huge challenges. I said they face huge challenges.
Yes. But not on anything like the scale that the Construction Employers Federation and the RSUA says is the case.
Over what period of time are they talking? You're a journalist, ask them the question. Over what period of time are they talking?
Well, I think there is no simple answer to that question because it depends on the particular project. But some of these... The
question hasn't been asked.
Well, there was a hearing of the Infrastructure Committee. I'm sure you've looked at it. I've looked at it. It lasted over 2 hours. There's an awful lot of detail in there. Yeah. And I think you can't talk about a time period for any one... for an overall period of these developments because each of them are different. But some of them have been built with promises from NI Water about connection, which then hasn't been delivered. Well, you need to go and look at the detail of the committee.
This. You told me before, I'm sitting here, you've told me you've researched these issues. What promises were made? Okay.
You obviously don't think that it is a problem on the scale
No.
that these
again,
other
don't put
people
words in my
believe in it?
mouth.
Well, you clearly don't, because I've quoted figures and you said you don't recognise them.
Here's what I
Let's
have
talk
done.
about let's talk about what happens
what
from
I have
here
done,
on
Mark,
in.
of what a minister should do.
Yeah.
I have examined the detail of the issues before me. I have looked at the scale of the problem, and to understand the scale of the problem, then you know what you need to do to resolve it. Yeah. That's what I have done.
Okay, so there is a serious question about the structure of Northern Ireland water at the moment, and you will know that there was a call recently in an audit office report for the department to establish a comprehensive review of alternative arrangements for how Northern Ireland water operates. That's how serious this situation is. Is that something that you are considering? Do you think that a root and branch review of NI water is appropriate at this stage?
Well, I think the actual audit office report called for was an expert to be brought in to look at how NI water is financed.
Yeah, I think it was an expert panel. Yes, that's right. Yeah. Yes. So would you agree with that?
Well, you see, what the report asked to be done was to carry out a report that has already been done in 2020. So another report in 2024 says, carry out another report into how NI water is financed. So my view is that would not necessarily be the best use of my department's time at this stage, because the report in 2020 is still relevant. No financial equation has changed since that point. The models that you can look at are all known, and the alternative models, many of them lead to domestic water bills. I'm not bringing in domestic water bills.
No, you've made that very clear. You've also made it very clear that you don't want to do anything that would privatise the water system. But there are a number of other models between, for example, mutualisation and privatisation that you could look at, but for some reason you appear not to want to investigate.
Which model?
Well, there are a number of models that are I think quoted there. That are there's a privatisation, there's a public corporation model, for example, there's a cooperative model. And these were all discussed in that hearing in the Infrastructure Committee, where representatives of the RSUA and the CEF put these potential changes on the table. Because what it would allow Northern Ireland Water to do in a changed model, in a different model, would be to borrow, and then it would have more money to spend.
NI Water can already borrow.
Yeah.
When they borrow, it's banked against the government's books.
Right.
If you want
why is it not borrowing more money then and sorting all these problems out?
Because same as every company. You can only borrow against so much of your assets. And it would be very foolhardy for any company to borrow more than its assets are worth. And when we can see when companies and water companies act foolhardy, such as Thames Water in England, what happens? They go into a financial crisis, they do not carry out their functions properly, and there is wide-scale environmental damage caused as a result of that. Okay,
so are you saying, just to be absolutely clear, that the current funding model, the current way in which Northern Ireland Water is established, is fit for purpose and doesn't need to be reviewed?
And in fairness,
you don't think it would benefit from any of the changes?
And in fairness, the audit report doesn't suggest it's not fit for purpose. It doesn't suggest it's not fit for purpose. What it suggests is that we look at alternative models.
Yeah.
All alternative models...
Exactly. It suggests looking at alternative models, but you're not prepared to do that.
All alternative models that have been brought to my attention thus far involve domestic water charges. I am not introducing domestic water charges.
But the system clearly needs some sort of change, and it's been very clear. Again, if you look at the evidence that was given by those experts, they made it very clear that it doesn't necessarily have to involve domestic water charges.
Well, in fairness, they're construction experts. They're not experts in relation to water companies.
Well, they're experts in the process of construction, and they are building, a lot of them, social housing.
Yes.
And the social housing, which is something that we do not have enough of in Northern Ireland at the moment, is sitting there, some of it, finished, ready for people to move into if only the water system could connect to it. And I think people at home will find it hard to understand how you could say that that is a system which is working.
Ian, we go back to the question, what was the planning conditions on those properties before they were built?
Well, I mean, I can't sit here and tell you what the planning was for each of the different things. When you look at the examples that I have given you of the 29 houses, for example, in Dungannon, that are sitting ready for handover since March 2024. That's 6 months ago. They've been ready. But the reason that they haven't, hang on, the reason that they are not currently being lived in by families who need to live in them is because the water system can't connect to those houses.
Okay. So
that's really not a system that's working, is it?
No, but you invited me into the studio this evening, quite rightly, to talk about NI Water.
Yeah.
You have clearly researched a number of projects, which you could have made me aware of before I came in. You chose not to.
But I didn't choose not to. I thought you may well have been aware of them.
Why would I be aware of NI Water?
Well, because you're the minister. Because you say you're an expert in this.
I've never once claimed to be an expert. Never once. But I am informed of my role. And what I've already said to you, the next piece of research you do is you need to look at the planning conditions where we're on those developments before they commenced.
Right.
And that will give you the answer to the question.
OK, so in the recent monitoring round, you gave an additional £31 million to Northern Ireland Water. I think you said at the time 19.5 million of that is to tackle the wastewater issues. Would you be saying that that is not enough to do what you would like to do?
Enough.
Right. So how much more do you think you would need to be able to do what it is that you want to do?
Well,
how short are you?
I would like to be able to fund NI Water to the full equivalent of what is set out in the price control period between up until 2027. So this year I'm short maybe another 100 million. I don't know what the budget is for next year or the following years. So as I said, I've already approached this on a three-pronged approach basis. I believe that the strategy will pay dividends. I cannot guarantee, same as all of our public sector, I cannot guarantee at this stage that they'll be fully funded up to that stage. But I also want to ensure that NI Water is delivering an efficient, effective service, not only to the general public, but also to the developers you talk about. And we're ensuring that we're not putting unnecessary restrictions in the way of future development, whether that's social homes, other homes, or our industries and businesses that are out there.
OK. There are other issues that I need to talk to you about as well. MOTs, I referenced them at the beginning of this conversation. There is a new vehicle test centre at Hydebank under construction, a building that recently won an award for its design, but it appears what's inside doesn't seem to be fit for purpose. A month ago, you'll know, Sunday Politics revealed the DVA had issued a termination of contract to the US-based company which installed the testing equipment and software at the centre. And we reported that in a letter to members of the Infrastructure Committee, you'd accused the company, Worldwide Environmental Products, of failing to properly install and commission the equipment in accordance with the contract. And I just wonder, what's the precise status of that situation as we speak tonight?
It's going to court. The company involved is challenging the DVA decision to end that contract. There is a court hearing in mid-January where the details of each side's case will be laid out before a judge. But it's quite clear that we're not satisfied with the delivery of that contract to date, and we had to move and take the actions we did to firstly protect the public purse, but also to reach a point where we're opening that centre to MOTs in a safe and effective way, not only for the members of the public, but also for the staff who work on it. Yeah.
So when realistically do you think the first MOT test will take place at Hydebank? I mean, is there any possibility of that happening next year, 2025?
Well, I think there's a possibility of it happening next year. A lot of it will depend on, obviously, the court ruling and how long it takes for the judgment to come forward. But I think we were left with, and we have explored numerous options since I've come into office over this last 9 months. No one wants to end up in the position we've been in. It was the last option we had. We have taken it. But I believe it was the right decision to make.
People may be aware of the fact that the DVA unsuccessfully tried to terminate the contract back in February 2022. So clearly it has been problematic for some time. I think planning permission for this MOT centre was received in 2019. So it's an ongoing issue. There was a failure to terminate the contract in 2022. It would make you wonder how successful it might be this time around.
Well, you don't know what happens when you go into a court.
No.
The judge will make his or her judgment in regards to these matters, but I'm satisfied with the reports that I've received from DVA and my engagement with DVA over this last 9 months that all appropriate actions have been taken to date. The last option available to us was to terminate the contract. We have done that, and the company has taken a court injunction against us. We will defend our case.
And what about the other MOT centre that's planned for Mollusk? Where does it stand?
It's under construction. It's affected by this court case.
Is it the same contractor that's providing
it's affected by this court case.
Okay.
So the quicker we have the court case settled and a judgment made, the better.
I want to ask you one last question. This is Road Safety Week in Northern Ireland. Last year in 2023, 71 people lost their lives, and that was the highest number of deaths in 8 years. So far, this year's death toll stands officially, as I understand it, at 58. You have talked about introducing a graduated driver licensing scheme which would put restrictions on new drivers, and David Jackson from Road Safety and I said on the radio the other day it would make for safer driving. Legislation was passed 8 years ago for you to be able to implement this. What's the delay?
8 years ago the overall act was introduced. Obviously we've had the Assembly down since, but since I've come into office I've looked at the legislation. I need to move what's known as a commencement order. I also need to move a number of pieces of regulation in that regard, which I intend to do. But I also need to invest in a logbook system for young drivers, so they can log what their journeys and their experiences, etc. The best way of doing that nowadays is through an app. The development of that app will take some time, but it'll also take some investment. I have set some money aside in this financial year to start the development of that app.
But you are going down that road, just to be clear. So those restrictions will eventually come in?
Well, if I get the agreement of my Assembly colleagues, they'll come in, because the regulation has to be passed, and the legislation has to be passed through the Assembly. They did pass the initial phase of it back in 2016, so I'm extremely hopeful they will follow through on their intentions at that time, but it will require the Assembly agreement. OK. Best case scenario, just briefly, if you would, do you think you'll get that support? And if you do, when would that be on the statute books? Well, I'm hopeful I will get that support. It will be on the statute books, I would hope, within the next year. Within the next year? Yes. OK, all right. We'll leave it there for now. John O'Dowd, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Now, on Friday, MPs will vote on whether or not to legalise assisted dying in England and Wales. It's a topic we'll be covering this weekend on Sunday Politics. Here's a flavour of the debate.
Somebody needs to just stand up and address it, you know. We're in the modern world now, you know, things need to be addressed. Stop hiding and stop brushing things under the carpet in the hope that somebody else will pick it up 5 years later.
Wherever across the globe that this has been legislated for, we do see that the qualification for the procedure widens. Inevitably it widens from very narrowly defined terminal illnesses. It always moves to mental illness, to disabilities. And I think that what we have to say is, look, do we value life or do we not?
But I think the important thing is that the bill at Westminster, the bill in Scotland, the Isle of Man, Jersey, the Republic of Ireland, they're all that little bit different because they all reflect the issues and the concerns that the local community have. So until we have the discussion ourselves, we won't know exactly what we're happy with. And that's the important thing, that the bill reflects what the people of Northern Ireland want to have.
And you can see that report on assisted dying in full on Sunday Politics this weekend. Now, let's return to the election in the Republic. Polling day is tomorrow week, and so far the campaign hasn't quite taken off. The three big parties are with me now to talk about some of the issues that have been in the spotlight over the past couple of weeks. Fine Gael's Neil Richmond is a minister in the Department of Enterprise. Thomas Byrne from Fianna Fáil is the outgoing Minister for Sport. And Sinn Féin's Mairead Farrell served briefly as the chair of the Dáil's Public Accounts Committee. Welcome to all of you, and thanks very much indeed for joining us on the programme tonight. Neil Richmond, first of all, are voters better off, do you think, after 4 years of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in government together?
I think absolutely. People have more money in their back pockets despite massive global challenges of a pandemic, of the inflationary crisis, the cost of living crisis, and Russia's brutal war in Ukraine. But we have a situation now where we are able in the last budget to cut income tax, to cut the USC, and more importantly, to continue to increase investment in new schools, in new transport facilities, and realise that people have the opportunity now to buy a home that didn't many years ago. When I was elected to the Dáil 4.5 years ago, we were building about 11,000 homes a year. This year, we see 50,000 homes under construction. We see 500 people buying their own home every week.
So what is that? Is that a pitch for voters to return Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in government together? You're inextricably linked, are you?
Well, I think the last government has worked really well together. All three parties, we compromised where we had to compromise, but we've worked well in really difficult situations. And we've been able to do that because we have had an economy that Fine Gael has completely turned around since 2011. Under the stewardships of the like of Michael Noonan and Pascal Donoghue, we've gone from having over 15% unemployment to 2011 to effectively full employment now, a growing economy. And certainly when I go to doors, a lot of people want to see a return for government, but I want to make sure that the next government is led by Simon Harris's Taoiseach with Fine Gael as part of it.
But no attempt on your part tonight on this programme, Neil Richmond, to differentiate Fine Gael from Fianna Fáil in any meaningful way, as I'm reading it.
Oh no, there's an abundance of differences. We're two distinct parties, and I do want to take this moment, Mark, to wish both Thomas and Mairead well in their elections. They can be gruelling, as everyone knows who puts their name on the ballot paper. But I very much see Fine Gael as the party, not only of enterprise and reward, but also of law and order. And the impact we've had in government for the last 13 and a half years has been transformative. We know there's a lot more need to be done. We want to continue to do it. And we're putting out a clear message to the voters in the Republic tonight and for the rest of the week to make sure they vote Fine Gael in order to return Simon Harris as Taoiseach.
Are you going to reciprocate, Thomas Byrne, and say that you're hoping that you will be back in government with your previous coalition partners on the other side of November 29th?
Well, Fianna Fáil is running for election, Mark, so that we can be in government and we can continue to make improvements. And yes, there have been improvements under this government, and Fianna Fáil has been at the heart of many of them. But we think, just sitting back on that progress is not enough. We've got to build on that progress. Fianna Fáil is there to maximise our own vote share. We want to go into government. We want to win as many seats as possible. We want to give our voters value for their vote and make sure that our policies are implemented. And when you look at housing, yes, we are at record levels of house building at the moment. We want to go further. But you can see the turn in house building in terms of the numbers of houses being completed happened when Fianna Fáil came into government. And we focus not just on house building targets, like many parties have done, but also on the boring work of storage connections, water connections, road connections, the type of things you were talking about there with John O'Dowd from the Northern Executive, because that is the work that actually gets those housing targets up. And Fianna Fáil's and the government's Housing for All plan has been key to making sure that we do everything necessary to get more houses built. And that is our top priority. It has been our top priority. We've seen progress, but we want to go further.
Yeah, you also have to put your hands up and say record numbers of homelessness under the last Fianna Fáil-Fine Gael coalition. You can't run away from that hard fact.
I haven't run away from it. You just asked me about it, and I'm happy to answer it. We want to reduce levels of homelessness, and the only way to deal with all of these issues in government is to build more houses, and that's what we're doing. Build, build, build. Get the sites ready, get the planning ready, get the water, spend money, and our manifesto commits to spending money on water and sewage to build those houses. It's the only way to solve the problem of high prices, high rentals, and the homeless crisis as well. There are lots of factors there, but ultimately the solution is to build more houses, and that's what Fianna Fáil is committed to doing. We've shown that we can do it, and we want to go further.
OK, Thomas Byrne, thank you for now. Mairead Farrell, Mary MacDonald, your party leader, wants to lead the next government, of course. Do you accept that at this stage that's simply not going to happen?
I don't at all, Mark. I think there's a week is a long time in politics, and if there's one thing that I know, having been involved in elections for the last 20 years, is that you don't know what the outcome of an election is going to be until you open the boxes and you count those votes. I think, though, from listening to what Thomas and what Neil were saying there, I don't know, do I live in a different reality or something, but the housing crisis has never been as bad as it is at this moment in time. I've been a public representative for the last 10 years, and I have never seen it as bad as it is now. We have a situation where there are 4,000 children in emergency accommodation. In Galway, where I'm from, both in Galway City and Galway County, emergency accommodation is full. There are waiting lists to get into homeless accommodation. I'm dealing with families who are working full time who can't afford to rent. I was just in the Gaeltacht in Connemara today, where we're still waiting on draft rural Gaeltacht planning guidelines to be published that Fianna Fáil promised us for 2.5 years to be published. There are serious, serious issues here. And so many of our young people have no choice but to live with their parents. Many of them have no other choice than to head off to Australia. And while obviously there's many young people who want to go for a year or two to Australia, and that's a good thing, the reality is that many don't really see much of another choice when they only have the choice of living in their parents' box room.
OK, well, so here's the question. If that is the case, sorry to cut across you, but if that is the case, and if housing is potentially the defining issue of this election, why is Sinn Féin not doing better in the polls? Why are you sitting at 18%?
Well, as I said, Mark, there's a huge amount between an election day and before that, and an election campaign. And we will not know what way votes are going to go until we see those boxes open. But don't forget either, Mark, a huge amount of our young people have had to emigrate, have had to go to the likes of Australia and beyond. And what I want to see and what we want to see in Sinn Féin is to build the kind of society that young people can and want to return home to. I did my Leaving Cert in 2008. We went into an economic crash, and so many of my friends had to emigrate at that point. So many of them are coming back and finding it really, really difficult to move out of their parents' homes. These are people who are in their mid-30s, who are married, and who have young children, who also want to be able to get full-time permanent jobs, but within the HSE, within the Health Service Executive. But there was a recruitment embargo put in, which meant that they couldn't get full-time permanent jobs.
Just briefly on this one, if you would. I mean, you've made it clear, your party leadership's made it clear you want to end 100 years of Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael in government, except that you seem to be happy to continue that 100 years as long as one or other of them would agree to be your partner in government. How does that work?
No, so we've been always very, very clear that we would prefer to see a government without Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. But at the end of the day, it is
prefer.
Of course, absolutely, Mark. But Mark, I'm not going to say that we aren't going to talk to this person. We're not going to talk to that person. We're not going to talk to this party or that party. We have a set of policies. We have a manifesto that lays out exactly what we want to do, what a Sinn Féin government would do. And that's what it comes down to. It comes down to manifestos, it comes down to policies, and it comes down to a programme for government. But we've been very clear. We would prefer to see a government without Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael. But Mark, as you know, and as everybody watching knows, that's a decision for the voters. That's a decision for the people who go out and vote.
All right. Thomas Byrne, your party leader has ruled out working with Sinn Féin after this election. But we should not forget, should we? He was adamant after the last election he wouldn't work with Fine Gael in government. So why should voters believe him this time?
Because I think of the contrast he makes between 100 years of Fianna Fáil being in government mostly, or maybe in opposition, and 100 years of Sinn Féin. Sinn Féin opposed all of the progress that this country has made in the last 100 years. They opposed the constitution, which set the path for us being the most highly educated country in the Western world. They opposed membership of the European Union, which set us up.
With respect, though, that's not an answer to my question. You said last time around, before the last election, that you wouldn't work with Fine Gael in government, but you did. So why should anybody believe you when you say you won't work with Sinn Féin after this election?
We know what Sinn Féin were at and their friends in the IRA as well during the Troubles. Fianna Fáil is committed to reconciliation. Fianna Fáil is committed to actually pushing this country forward, and our policies are completely incompatible with Sinn Féin. They're completely incompatible. We want to be constructive, proactive members of the European Union. Why? Because we want to make sure that we can influence policies that benefit this country, benefit our young people and all of our population. Sinn Féin have consistently opposed any kind of constructive engagement with the European Union. It's so important for us today, particularly in terms of the investment coming into the country. And we've got to be so careful about that in the context of the world that we're living in today and various election results around the world. It simply would not work if Sinn Féin were to be in government with Fianna Fáil in Dublin. It would be wrong. We're not going to do it. We are out there looking for as many votes as we can get, as many seats as we can win, to put our policies forward. And our policies are so distinct from Fine Gael, and they're so distinct from Sinn Féin. And Fianna Fáil as a party is entitled to do that. And in fact is...
I'll tell you what people here might find interesting and they might want to comment on, and they might expect me to ask a question about, which is when you say it is absolutely impossible for Fianna Fáil to sit in government with Sinn Féin in the Oireachtas. Unionists sit in government, are currently sitting in government with Sinn Féin at Stormont. So it could work if it had to.
It's a completely different scenario, with all due respect. We don't have the Stormont system. We don't have the Hunt system of government. We're not there because of the Good Friday Agreement, which incidentally is our priority in terms of our relations with Northern Ireland, our relations across this island and with Britain as well. It's just not a comparable situation.
Well, for many people, the point will stand. For many people, they will think it is a relevant point, and it's interesting that you choose to sidestep it.
I'm not sidestepping it because in the system of government in the South, the numbers dictate. In the system of government in Belfast, the numbers don't dictate because it's a cross-shared agreement because of the unique circumstances and the peace project that we've all worked so hard to maintain. And we're glad that government is in place in Belfast now.
All right, okay. Well, people will make up their own minds as far as that argument is concerned. Neil Richmond, you released an attack ad yesterday accusing Sinn Féin of looking to spend the state's rainy day fund. Sinn Féin's accused your party of telling lies. The fact is, what you've accused Sinn Féin of does not appear in the party's manifesto. So the charge is that you're resorting to a false attack.
Not at all. It's quite clear that we've seen from Sinn Féin's actions in the past, as well as their manifesto, that they have no interest in making sure that we can prepare for the future. Sinn Féin opposed our previous rainy day fund. Well, Mark, When it started raining with the COVID pandemic, we really needed that fund. At the moment, this government has put over €16 billion into funds that will not only be there for the future should things get a little bit difficult, but also they are funds that will make money. There's no such commitment from Fianna Fáil to match that, or Sinn Féin to match that. Instead, what we have in our manifesto is to build that fund up to €30 billion. But what we saw yesterday when Sinn Féin eventually released their manifesto, long after the first leaders' base, is a complete fallacy of any decent economics.
Are you sure you didn't prepare this attack ad before the publication of Sinn Féin's manifesto and find yourself somewhat caught out?
Not at all, because Sinn Féin's manifesto was a complete mystery until after the leaders actually had their debate. Indeed, it was so interesting that when they launched their childcare policy less than 2 months ago, they never mentioned any direct intervention in terms of state provision of childcare. And next thing, 2 months later, we see a complete flip-flop when it comes to Sinn Féin's manifesto. They are literally making up policy on the huff. But what we have said...
Well, let's ask Mairead Farrell. Are you going to raid the nation's piggy bank?
No, and just on the childcare stuff, just to be clear here, it was Sinn Féin who had the policy of €10 a day childcare that now Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael both seem to be going with and taking our policies. And first of all, just to be very clear, Neil, we didn't launch our manifesto yesterday. We launched it the day before yesterday. But of course, facts don't always need to be, I suppose, the key thing here. But just to be very clear, we have a very clear manifesto as to what we want to do. We know what the big issues that need to be tackled. And the key issue of the day, no question, is the key issue of housing. And Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, who have been in government for far too long, just don't get that. They don't understand that that's the key issue that needs to be tackled. And I think they're just out of ideas. And instead of, going front-footed with positive of their own messaging, they have to go on the attack because they just don't have that positive front-footed messaging.
OK, Neil Richmond, 18 years. It would be 18 years of Fine Gael in government. Is that good for democracy?
Well, it's good for democracy. It's good for the economy. Bear in mind, Fine Gael are the party that rescued the country from economic collapse. And rather than put 22 new taxes on the Irish people like Mairead's party wants to do, we have clearly got a vision that not only protects and grows our economy, but allows us to use that economy to invest in childcare, invest in new schools, and realistically build more homes that people can actually own. We've a fivefold increase in the amount of homes being built. We're addressing this election in a positive manner, ready to return Simon Harris as Taoiseach of this nation.
OK, Thomas Byrne, you're the Sports Minister. I want to ask you very briefly. Sorry, Thomas Byrne, very quickly. Casement Park, we understand, could cost £270 million. Dublin's offered to contribute £40 million. There's a big shortfall. Would your party want to increase that money, yes or no? Very quickly.
Look, there's already been a very significant commitment made to Casement Park. We're going to massively increase the Shared Island Fund.
OK.
There are opportunities within that, and that is something that Fianna Fáil has put in place, which is putting into action really good cross-border projects at the moment.
OK.
And Casement Park, the massive funding that's already committed.
OK, we've got to leave it there, folks. All right, OK. Sorry to squeeze you, but we're out of time. Thanks very much indeed to the three of you for joining us tonight. That's all we've time for. I'll be back at the weekend with Sunday Politics at the usual time of 10 o'clock here on BBC One and on iPlayer. For now, thanks for watching us from everybody on the team. Good night.